Right now I'm president of the Waters District Council for Historic Preservation. And one of our main events each year that the council puts on is the observation of the Shannon Memorial Day services. We have the first World War II monument in the nation up there at Shannon, and one of our main people that we've had on with us to do the keynote speech and this year to make a dedication and all is Lieutenant General Billy Brown. And so I'd like to introduce Billy Brown here now, and he started out up there in the Boy Scout troop in 1946 when that monument was dedicated, and he was a second-class Boy Scout, and he's still active duty. He's not retired. He's a lieutenant general, 3-star general right now. And so I always, lots of times when I introduce him at these ceremonies, I introduce him as having been the second-class Boy Scout and come back to us as a 3-star general. I think that in and of itself is quite an accomplishment, but we're going to be talking with Billy here today, and he's an amazing individual and a great benefactor to our community and contributor to our historical association. So, Billy, I believe I'm right there, and when I say you're still active duty.
Yes.
Well, isn't that kind of unusual for there to be a general of your age? And I'm not getting on to you about your age, but you've been here long enough to know better. How in the world you still a lieutenant general today? And I believe you're over the Chaplin Corps. Is that right?
No, I'm in headquarters.
In the headquarters.
There's
okay.
4 of us in headquarters. The country's divided up under us. I think I have about 12 states that I'm responsible for. However, I'm really not doing that much because there's so many other people down the line that which I have been through just about all the ranks. However, I was fortunate enough when I went into the Corps. It's a point system, and I had no idea where I would start. My interest was to work with veterans. That would give me a better opportunity working with veterans, and so I left there, and I was in the military till I was 18, and I had only had 8th grade and education. I came out and took advantage of the GI Bill and eventually got 5 or 6 degrees. I had a bunch of diplomas and quite a bit of experience. I worked with 3 hospitals and so forth, and pastored several churches and organized 5, 3 in the United States, 2 in the foreign countries. And there was a shortage of chaplains in the Corps, and I volunteered, and after several interviews I was accepted. And you go in on a point system. If you are commissioned in the military, you go into the Corps according to your commission in the military. And I wasn't commissioned, I was a squad leader, but according to my experience and so forth, the points, I guess you might say fudged, because I was commissioned a colonel going in. And after holding several different positions, I was called by my commander one day, and he says, "I need you in headquarters." And I told him, I said, "Well, sir, I'd rather not be in headquarters. The position I was in, I was comfortable with it and enjoyed it. However, I wanted to help him if I could. The great people in headquarters." And he says, "Well, I need you." And he never heard I didn't want to be. he just finally said, well, I need you. And I said, well, I don't want another promotion, because I had bypassed people that had been in longer than me, and I didn't ask for any rank or entitlement or notoriety. That doesn't interest me at all. So I went to a meeting, and he announced that I had gone into headquarters and been commissioned as a lieutenant general, because all four of us in headquarters hold that rank.
Well, that's really interesting, and we're so proud to have our own homegrown general from the Shannon area. Now, let's back up a little bit here. You were 14 when you went into the service, and of course you hadn't finished high school, but you went to school there at Model, the same school I went to, and so you were there the day that monument was dedicated, which was November the 10th, of 1946, which I suppose that what that was, it was what we then called Armistice Day, November the 11th. But I looked up, and November the 10th was on a Sunday, and we have some old pictures of there. It looks quite different from when we celebrate up there every year now, where everybody's there in their Walmart clothes, so to speak, just dressed every which way. All those people were out there in their Sunday best, I noticed in that picture. The men all had on coats and ties, and the women were dressed up, and just like they was going to church, and probably majority of them had been to church, because they had that in the afternoon. Probably about 3 or 4 o'clock, I'm not sure at the time, but it was Sunday afternoon, 1946, and so you were there. How old were you then in 1946? You'd been in the Scouts, and you told me you was rank of 2nd class Boy Scout, Troop 30, Shannon, Georgia. So you would had to have been 11 years old, I guess, to get into the Scouts. I think that was the age. But without doing any arithmetic, you were fairly young, but wasn't long till you was going into service yourself. So do you remember anything particularly about that day as you stood up there and listened to Mr. Morrison's speech when he gave the dedication speech?
You know, Jack, in our lives we have several, I would say, defining experiences, and of course there's always, I guess, one or two that stands out more than others. But I would have to say that the service that day was a defining experience, one of mine in my life, because it was such a beautiful service. And I was very patriotic. I loved the Boy Scouts. And I guess had I not went into the military, I would have stayed in the Boy Scouts, because there were things I learned that were very helpful to me in the service. And because what I did in the military, in our type of unit, we were all volunteers, and there's a lot of things that I had learned in the Scouts that were very helpful to me living out and serving wherever. And that day stood out and has been all my life a great memory, just like life at Shannon itself. Now, it took me years to understand that. Over the years of my life, I would look back and remember my life at Shannon. And back then, I did not realize what it had done for me. And that service that day made me want to do something for my country.
So it made quite an impression on you. And, you know, there was so much patriotism in that day. Now, I was only 7 years old at that time, I believe. And I don't think I went to that ceremony. I went to the one 5 months later when they dedicated the monument to school, which I guess would be the second one and the oldest one in the nation. But nevertheless, according to all the pictures and everything that were made that day, they were probably more like thousands than hundreds of people there, because it was right after the war. Only about a year after the war had ended, and there was nobody in the community that had been affected by that war, and probably very few people that didn't have some of their kin in that war. And the mill there, which was called Brighton Mill then, they had 408 of their employees that served in World War II. And there were 12 of them that didn't come home. And that's what that dedication was for that day up there. Their names was put on that monument. They're there today. And of course we celebrated it, or I don't guess I should say celebrate. We observed that this year, as we do each year. And you were there, because you were there at the first one. And I don't think that there was anybody up there this year that had been at the first one other than you. It's quite a historical thing, but the patriotism then was so obvious. Everybody was out there. The mill had about 1,500 employees at that time. So nearly a third of them had served in World War II. Now, you got to say, well, probably, with 1,500 employees, they must have been at least 3,000 people there that were families, of the mill workers and all. And the school was also considered part of the Brighton family up there, model school. So you just get those two groups of people out from the mill and the school, and you would have had thousands of people.
Yeah.
And from the looks of the pictures and all, there must have been a couple thousand people there that day, and they had a big bandstand built that was huge. I guess it was 50 foot wide, and a whole array of people could stand up on that bandstand. They had put that up just for the Memorial Day. So the patriotism, we don't have that patriotism today, but we do have the memory. So this year, you donated a flag. Now, the flagpole out there where the monument is I think it's 76 feet tall. It's a pretty good sized flagpole. It requires a 12 by 18 foot flag. And if we fly that thing much, we have to buy a new one every year. But you donated a flag this year, and you wanted it to represent some of the fellers that were in your outfit in Korea that got killed. And so we're going to have the scouts to do a flag raising ceremony up there where you get a chance to dedicate that flag. But in the meantime, we had it in time to put up for our Memorial Day this year, so that was your flag. We're only going to fly it on Memorial Days and maybe Veterans Day and 4th of July. That's going to be a special flag for that reason, and it'll last for many years to come. But you want to tell us a little bit about your idea on these fellers that you want to dedicate that flag to?
I appreciate this opportunity, Jack. First of all, the World War II men from the mill there that were killed stood out so much in my mind and my heart, and still do. Because World War II was a war that freedom was won for the whole world. And I think sometimes we forget that, because that was the war that freed all the countries that retained it. And every war since then has been one that preserves it, tries to preserve that freedom that was won by those men. And I have always thought of them, and one of them I remember that was a friend of one of my uncles. Then the young men that I had to think about, and I think about them every day, I guess, morning or evening. We have a saying in our association, thinking about these from my unit that were killed in Korea. And the saying is, they shall not grow old as we go old. Age shall not worry them. But at the going down of the sun, forgive me, and in the morning we will remember. And I had promised God during a time that it was, I thought completely, did not know why that we were doing what we were doing to one another during combat. It didn't make sense. But I remember saying, I don't want to do this anymore. Now, I did my duty. I was commended by General Westmoreland as being a good soldier and serving with distinction. In fact, he gave me something for that, so he said. But I have never forgot those. Actually, they were kids. We called each other men, so many men for this, so many men for that. But actually, 17, 18, I was 16 when I parachuted into Korea. I had my 17th and 18th birthday over there. And we used to think, well, who's next? And, of course, we joked a lot about that. But I was very fortunate. And I did not know anything about the Bible. I knew 3 scriptures that I learned at model school in 3rd grade. One was the Lord's Prayer. The other one, another was the 23rd Psalm and the 100th Psalm. And I thought about those scriptures. And I remember that day when I said, this is insanity, because I had remembered, I'd been asked on several occasions about what it was like to go into combat at that age, and I'd always say, well, I guess it's the same feeling for anyone, whether 16, 28, whatever age, it's the same feeling. I know the one thing that I had, I'm not really angry at anybody. I don't know why I'm doing this, but I was well trained like the rest of us. I said I could be home eating a hamburger and drinking a milkshake and listening to the jukebox. But I had a commitment, and I've been asked several times how you go on into things like that. What about, is it courage? Well, I think so. Are you afraid? No, petrified. But you have a commitment. And the only thing I could ever say in looking back is I had a commitment to them, and I feel they had a commitment to me. And they were great, fine young men that I feel like could have meant a lot to this country. To they were just a little cut above, I would think. I don't know nothing against anyone in the military. I've always respected all the members and still do, and that's why I try to work with the military today. But I've been asked why I do what I do. Sometimes I say, well, why am I doing this? But I remember back that I told God, I said, now I don't want to try to make deals to get out of this. I can't do that. I even feel guilty about what I said, but I said, if I get through this, I don't want to do this anymore. Now, if I had to, I would. But rather not. And I'd rather build. And so my purpose in what I'm doing is I can't quit. I think about it a lot. As my wife, she's so encouraging. And couldn't have anyone better to put up with me. But I think back then, I made a promise to God to honor God and honor these 8 young, just boys that didn't make it. And they were outstanding young men. And I learned then that looking back on those young men from World War II, I learned now, over the years, I've thought about it a lot, and even back then, but I didn't understand at first until later why we were there, because we went to a country we'd never heard of, a people we didn't know, a language we couldn't speak, and a war we didn't understand what it was for. But we learned, we did free South Korea, and they honor us today, and we appreciate it very much. So I think of those young men every day, and that's why I asked if I could include that, not in the same context, because those World War II young men were from a generation we'll never know again. But at the same time, I feel were young men that through it all, we were so inspired, because we had a lot of, when I went in, a lot of leadership from World War II that contributed to us.
So these 8 were in your outfit. I mean, what size outfit? How many men were in what you call the outfit there during the Korean War?
We had a total. We were a small unit. We think of a division, which I won't go into all of the different parts of a division, but we were what was called a regimental combat team. We were a small unit, all volunteers, strictly volunteers all the way. We had special training for special missions, and we were a parachute regiment. Back then, we did not have the helicopter services we have today, which are very effective. We were strictly a parachute unit, and they needed a unit that could be highly mobile. And MacArthur asked for a unit of this type, and my unit was in a division and was chosen to go to the Far East and serve in that capacity.
So these 8 individuals, they're people that you worked with the whole time that were, actually, I guess what you'd refer them to as your buddies during combat.
Very, very close. In fact, we didn't realize it, I guess, to express it, verbally what we felt, and I'm sure they felt like I did in my heart, that I have a commitment because of him. And we had to meet a lot of extra requirements to qualify for the unit, because if you didn't, they'd kick you out even after you became a member of it.
Well, let's back up a little bit here to our Memorial Day that we have at Shannon, and the fact that that's we claim it to be the first monument put up for lost lives in World War II, and we've been claiming that for nearly 20 years, and we said we'd give up that claim anytime somebody come forward for something earlier, and so far nobody has. So we're beginning to think it really is the oldest one in the nation. And they didn't get a World War II monument put up in Washington, till just here a few years ago. And we had one there in Shannon the whole time. And it's all because of one feller that was the greatest benefactor that our community ever had. And you knew him, and I knew him, and everybody in the community knew him, Mr. Julian K. Morrison. And Julian K. Morrison was, he came there to be the head of the Brighton Mills. And he was the first manager or president of the mill there, and remained so until his untimely death. I believe in 1949. He died only about 3 years after he made this dedication. But you had a lot of comments about Mr. Morrison. In fact, you made the dedication when we unveiled that marker plaque up there this last Memorial Day, and but you had a lot of favorable comments about him in that talk up there that day and all. But it seems that the Shannon community meant quite a bit to you and had quite an impact on your life too. So I think this is one thing, probably the last thing that we want to cover here today. But just tell us a little bit about the Shannon community and Mr. Morrison and how this kind of came about that you were able to participate in the first ceremony there and all. So just tell us a little bit about Shannon and Mr. Morrison.
Well, I appreciate so much you and the Historical Commission, and I think this last memorial service was the most profound service and most descriptive one that I know of there, that I've been involved in or around, because I've looked back a lot of times at the community, the leadership. There had to be great leadership in Shannon. I remember Christmas. I remember that they had a tree every year, and all the children, no matter who they were, came and stood in a line, and we went through and received a bag of nuts and fruit and candy and a toy. And I didn't know anywhere else they did that. And every year we had a barbecue that everyone was welcome to. It was a good time. Started in the morning, went all the way into the night. We had several other things of that nature all through the year. The women in the area that loved to sing was in a beautiful group called the Choral Club. Your mother sung in it, my mother did, and as well as so many other things. And everything that all of the organization that was so good, the meal supported it and was behind it. And we knew that Mr. Morrison was very effective in the leadership. I think this last dedication that you led us in brought out a depth in Mr. Morrison we never knew, that helps us to understand even more his feelings as an American, a great citizen, a great leader in industry, and a heart for a community that he led the industry in, that provided a great livelihood for the people. I remember it seemed like everyone was so respected. And all of the organizations that we had to have a great mind. Now, there was others that were great to follow. We had a lot of great leaders in Shannon. But he was the one that had the vision, I guess, of the heart of people. And he felt it, because we could have never had the things going on that we had. I remember during World War II, we had a scrap pile. All the metal you could get, you carried down and put it in that pile. We had other drives. We had victory gardens. We had all kind of things, plus the leadership to bring us together. Now, you can have those things, and you can have resources to do it, but you must have the leadership to put it together, and you well know that with your experience. And I remember that. And when you found out the things that you did, that we made other people understand about him, we never knew that he had served in World War I. We never knew that he was a highly decorated officer in World War I. Never, in all of the speeches he made, in all the writings, in all the messages, I don't remember ever reading anything that he said, and that's very highly unusual. Nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to not mention, but he never did. It seemed like he was always thinking about his fellow man and those that he was in charge of, that he could make their life better. He respected these men that served, men and women, and when they came back, they had a job waiting for them. All the support that anyone. And I say a lot of times when I speak somewhere, and I'll have someone that say, well, I didn't serve in the military, and I tell them, well, now, wait a minute. You may not have served in the military, but you served. Because were it not for people like you and good citizens, we that served would not have had a community to come back home to. And that's what he did. He provided a good place for all of the men and women that served to come back to. And they were proud of their community. And I think that's one of the things that influenced me. So I learned, not then, I didn't understand then what was happening, but within me, something was happening in me to shape my life that I learned there. We didn't lock doors. I don't remember ever having a key to the front door. You just didn't hear things like that. And it seemed like there was a great, now I know there were problems everywhere, but they were so minor. All I remember is cooperation, neighbors, everybody that was so neighborly. And Jack, that stayed with me, and it helped shape my life. Our model school. In model school, I learned patriotism. I went to church as a little boy, but the things that I learned that inspired me about God and the Bible were in model school. A teacher.
That's a little different today.
Yes, sir, but I memorized scripture because of a morning we stood and pledged allegiance to the flag, sung a patriotic song, and she left a scripture on the board. You know, we had, most rooms I remember had 2 boards. And the 23rd Psalm was put on the board, and it stayed until we learned it. The Lord's Prayer, the 100th Psalm. Those are the things that I thought about in the military. And when things were tough, I remembered Shannon, and I thought I wanted to get away from it. But I learned then through my uncle and coming back and talking with him a lot and then working with you. You've done so much, you and your group, to bring out what Shannon has meant. And I think that, and I've thought about all of the boys and girls and the people that grew up there, spread out all over the world, what kind of influence. I tell my wife, who was a teacher for so long, I tell her, honey, you don't know how far your influence has gone.
Well, Billy, you mentioned about great benefactors like Mr. Morrison. Then there was Mr. Miner, who later became Dr. Miner, president of Shorter College. He took all the pictures for the Wharton Weft magazine.
I remember.
And I heard tell that the mill paid him more than the school board did.
I don't doubt that.
I don't doubt it either. But anyway, you talk about great leaders and people that had influence on you. And, you know, all these years have passed, but we still got people in our community that fit that category. And one of them sitting here right now that I'm having interviewed. So I just want to tell you, you're in that mold there. You're to be appreciated by our community as a great benefactor to our community, a great advocate of our community, and a patriotic person of this country. So I just want to thank you for coming in here today and letting us do a little biographical sketch, I guess you could call it, on you here. And we'll get this down on the disc, and along with the dedication for the flag when the Boy Scouts do that for us. So we have everything recorded here. And again, it's been a pleasure to be able to sit here with you and interview it. So I wish you well in all that you do, and it's been a pleasure.
Jack, let me say this in closing. Thank you for the opportunity, because it has meant a lot to me in my life to be asked to come back to the community I thought I had left but never forgot. And you have given me that opportunity, you and others, to express my appreciation.
Well, I think it's mutual.
Well,
You've given me opportunity, and I've given you one, so
thank you, sir.
we'll leave it with that then.
Bye.